Thank you, Kira, for inviting me to speak tonight, and thank you, Rika, for that presentation. You might find some interesting parallels for learning about the show. So actually, I will talk to you later. So from about 2009 till about last year, I was on this artist residency circuit. So I was traveling from different states, maybe 2 to 3 times a year, literally moving from one location to the next to do an artist residency program. And whenever I go to the next residency, people would ask me, oh, what are you making? And they thought that, oh, if I said I'm making functional design, oh, you're a furniture repairer. And in the next residency, I'd be doing completely sculptural work, and they say, oh, you're a sculptor. And I realized that there was a lot of confusion because people were thinking that my practice or my program is defined specifically by one discipline, which is actually not the case. So I felt the best way to describe what I do is to emphasize what my main focus is, and that is surrounding the material that I use to make work. And the material that I pull tends to be from kind of that disregarded category. So it's the surplus that you see generating in warehouses. It's the mundane materials that you use, but you kind of throw away very quickly because you think there's no function for it. It's the simple everyday things that people tend to overlook and just discard very quickly. And for me, that's actually a very sad thing to see. I think that is really reflective of how we treat people, actually. So we think things are waste very fast, and we tend to treat people like that. So when I do come across material that I think has potential, I spend time with it. And as I'm spending time with it, I get to learn more about what it can do. And so within my practice, there are a handful of common threads that occur in the process. And one is the source of material. 2 is the type of repetitive tasks that I employ on the material to experiment and manipulate it. And 3, that no matter how long I experiment, there are continued iterations that can happen and so forth. And with that, I try to find the best situation or best outcome for the time I've had to experiment with the material. So to give you an example of what I would do, I'm starting off with some images. So this is outdated fire hose in steel. It's a 3-panel hanging room divider, and it's meant to kind of reflect an abstracted topographical landscape. And it's basically reverse coiled, and if you had that in the middle of your room, you could see different effects from one side versus the other side. And then with kind of a similar technique, but in a different situation, I took condemned fire hose from the San Diego Fire Department and combined it with condemned fire hose from the Syracuse Fire Department and created this functional pathway. It's about 50 feet long, and the outer contours were generated based off the different patterns that were reflected through the clearing, which I spent time observing that, noting that, and then kind of helping that to generate the overall form. Another example of manipulating material, SBC white pages, donated about 1,000 outdated and misprinted phone books to me. And what I was doing is I was folding and creasing every page and interlacing them in different patterns. So I was folding in sets of thousands and then interlacing them. And what I felt was happening here is you're actually seeing the weaving of 2 different patterns. One is in my behavior to kind of work obsessively, and the other was the pattern that already existed in the graphic information and text within the books. So the visual, the final piece visually is reflective of the weaving of those 2 patterns. So the pages are not cut, they're folded. It's really important that they're folded and creased because a different effect happens. And so, I talked about doing a lot of repetitive tasks, mundane tasks. Well, folding and creasing is definitely one of those. And for me, as I'm doing that, I'm actually not thinking it's work. It's very meditative and actually very reflective of my internal cadence. So if I'm stressed out and I'm folding, you can actually hear it in the folding of the pages. If I'm relaxed, the speed is a little slower, maybe not so kind of crazy and chaotic. But I remember folding these pages in a wood shop, and people could hear the difference between the noises in the main machine room compared to the noises of the pages that I was creasing. So it was very interesting to see that happen. From that same pile of phone books, this is kind of an installation, smaller installation piece where the top part of the 5/8 steel was cut, and all the pages I folded and creased, about 24 books, where all the pages are interlacing. So that's just the detail that's going on. Sometimes the material I get is used, and you can tell because there's like that patina that's still on, like the oils from one's hands or so forth, and I respond to that. I try to kind of maybe clean it up or do something to it in a way to kind of elevate its value, at least the way I think it should be valued. And then sometimes the material I have is just coming from a large surplus location where no one has touched it yet, but so it might look very clean or new, but there's no one coming to claim it as something functional. And so with my experimentation, that's a range. Sometimes it's very minimal, sometimes it's just about stacking the material and creating different configurations, and then it can go to the extreme end where I'm actually cutting into it and reconfiguring it and so forth. So I don't know how many of you have used a shim in your home to kind of keep your table level, or within construction, actually it's usually hidden within the drywall to kind of, kind of register your windowsills and frames. Well, I started working with shims for a series of installation pieces, and this is ongoing still. This is back from 2007. And I shimmed my refrigerator in between my living room and my kitchen. And this was a test piece. So there was one more other test piece, which is somewhere in the middle between that size and this size. This is about 26 feet long. This is at the Art Produce Gallery in San Diego. And I borrowed local appliances and kind of arranged them formally. So I stood across the street, kind of looked at the way things would be arranged, positioned them in space, shimmed around them. There's only about maybe 18 inches away from the appliance to the window. So I did have to put 2x4s in the back in case there's an earthquake, so that I don't die by looking at this installation. But what I should point out is that the shims are not glued, so they're just puzzle pieces and stacked. And so for me, if I glue them, then they become kind of useless. Like, you can't actually use them for their original purpose. And so I love the idea that after the end of the installation, there was still life that could be given to the material. And so then I would donate them to the local Habitat for Humanity, and they would be used for their original purpose. This is another kind of iteration. So I've been continuing on with this installation series of shims, and this is at the ASU Art Museum. And because I had a solid wall in the back and I was stacking them, I felt like I could actually draw more with the material. And I tried to emphasize changes in value for light and dark areas. And I would take a sanding block or hand plane and remove some of the wood like an eraser, basically kind of removing away to kind of emphasize those areas. So before I go further, I'll just give you a little bit of my background. My parents came from South Korea to the United States, and I was born here. I'm the oldest, so if you can think of a Korean family, the oldest daughter, lots of responsibility, not as much fun, and then I had a brother and a sister. And my parents actually, they came to the United States not only for a better life, but they were leaving a very poor situation in South Korea. So my father was studying pharmaceutical drug development and research, and he ended up working at Abbott Labs for quite some time. My mom was a microbiologist, and it was just kind of assumed that I was going to follow their footsteps. And so I went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison to study chemistry. And somewhere about halfway through being there, I realized that there was no way that I was going to be your typical chemist. There's no way I was going to enjoy this lifestyle. But it's also because back in the day, because I was studying at Madison in the mid-90s for my undergraduate degree, they were not saying that, hey, you can think about art and science together. There was no joining of those fields. It was more about you need to follow science and then you're just going to stick with it. So I really felt like I had to make the first, biggest, riskiest decision ever, and that was to beg my parents to just agree with me on this, that I'm going to just go for it, and I'm going to go into art or design, and I'm just going to I'm gonna wing it. And originally they were not so happy about it, but eventually they realized, I mean, they loved me and they really wanted me to be happy. So I found out that they were teaching furniture design classes, actually, and woodworking classes at UW-Madison. So what I was able to do is keep my science credits and then add on these art credits. And so I was able to have kind of the best of both worlds, and I fell in love with furniture design and woodworking. So then I went to San Diego State, and I ended up studying under Wendy Maruyama to get my master's in furniture design and woodworking. And the focus was making furniture within this art studio. So it could be one-of-a-kind pieces, not necessarily production run pieces or meant for like commercial kind of applications or operations. And so I was exploring the different aspects of furniture making as an art form. And so just to give you an example, just the medicine chest, and I etched different Western medication in each of the bottom of the drawers, and there are about 50 smaller drawers. So as you can see, clearly repetition was something that I was really fond of. And I had worked with other types of forms and shapes, trying to push the notions of what could be defined as functional or furniture. And with this piece, I incorporated a stack of newspaper as part of the element to sit on. And for me, the idea here is that I love the edges of how the newspaper, when they were stacked in a pile, that edge that was created there. And I thought, well, I'm going to give it a shot. I'll integrate it into this piece of furniture, and I'll use it with hooded wood, which is considered kind of it is an exotic wood, it is expensive. Among makers, they would say it's fairly kind of high up there in terms of quality. So I was really trying to take this combination and present something that I thought was fairly beautiful. But what I realized is that just making furniture wasn't that enough for me. And therefore, I realized that really it's about taking all these different materials and doing what I can to really present the potential that's inherent in them. After finishing at San Diego State for my master's, I moved to the Bay Area and I started teaching at CCA part-time. I was working for electronic installation artistry at Campbell, and I was an artist at the Headland Center for the Arts. I started a residency at Recology, which I'm sure some of you might know is the dump. And that was actually pretty much kind of the most important start of my circuit, that art residency circuit I mentioned earlier. Because for me, with my parents coming from a background where they were so poor, growing up, we were not supposed to waste. And so that was already ingrained throughout my life. Like, you're not supposed to waste, you have to appreciate what you have. We would recycle and reuse many things, but it was because they were poor. And even when they started to earn more money, we were still saving things. So I just kind of had this mindset about not wasting. And I felt like in my own work, whether anybody knows it or not, I know what I'm wasting or I know what I'm generating, and that can be created as waste. But when I did the residency at the dump, it became very apparent to me that this was a significant problem. So San Francisco, being one of forefront in terms of recycling compared to other communities, and this amount of trash is generated every hour. The reason why the whole thing doesn't fill up is because the bulldozers are pushing it out into the semis. So during this residency, what I decided to do is just take the material that was generated in largest quantities, and I found that there was a combination of like construction material that was constantly being piled up in an area. So I ended up creating this modular seating unit, and it's composed of all these 2x4s that were reclaimed, over 177 2x4s, all the nails and screws removed. And then the cast concrete top is actually the leftover wet concrete from construction force in the city of San Francisco. So after they poured a foundation somewhere in San Francisco, that truck would be brought to Ecology, and I had molds ready to go to receive that excess concrete, that wet concrete. So instead of that wet concrete going to the landfill, it was actually being used to create the surfaces of the bench tops. And they're modular, they're interlocking. You can arrange them in just one line against the wall, and they kind of move out of the way, or you can activate the space out in the middle of that area. These are just some images from that process. Another kind of pivotal residency that I wanted to mention, and actually work from this I am still working on, or I continue to work on this, was when I was invited to come back to the UW-Madison about 10 years later as a resident artist, and the Forest Service Forest Products Laboratory is just kind of down the road on the campus in Madison. And I was able to make contact with engineer John F. Hunt from the USDA Forest Service Forest Products Lab. And he agreed to show me some of his forming processes. His expertise is in composite materials, pulp molded forms. You might have seen some of these before. He's interested in geometry, structural integrity, reforming, using a variety of recycled fiber in conjunction with wood, and even manure as well too. So for that residency, during the day I was learning the techniques of forming boards at the lab, and at night I was using the wood shop at UW to work on whatever project, not knowing what was actually going to happen. For my project at the university, I looked specifically for sources where they were generating quite a bit of excess material, and found this is about almost a 3-foot diameter above all the bottom line. It's about 16 feet long, and these are strips that are generated from a mill workplace. So I took those strips and I started making modified linear logs, still not knowing exactly what's going to happen. So basically making thousands of cuts on the table saw and assembling them into different configurations. But while I was generating the sawdust, I was also saving the sawdust, and at some point started to integrate the wood particles with certain mixtures of recycled fiber at the lab. And these are some examples, the next images are some examples of machines that I was trained to use. This wet forming chamber. That's actually me up there mixing the stuff in there, in the wet forming chamber. And using wet forming allows us to make boards without formaldehyde, and I'll talk just a little bit about that. I'm trying to go through this really quickly. So with kind of our first test boards, we actually made a structurally sound board out of what I was generating, what I was saving, and then combining it with the processing techniques that John was showing me, changing temperature and some of the variables, the pressure. And with the boards that I was making, I realized I could make more Lincoln log shapes. So I was actually taking the byproduct and turning it into a product. And I made this installation for the Madison Children's Museum. So all of you can see the solid wood pieces. This is suspended. I did all this by the upper arm strength, putting this in the air. But you also can see the part of the composite material, right? So you can kind of see the difference. So I felt really good about this project because I was literally creating almost no waste. And the children could look at what was going above. These are just different sections. And they could also play with the set that was below. So from that point on, this has been ongoing, I mentioned earlier. I still continue to research these composite boards with John. And at the same time, I'm teaching and working on my own artwork and other design pieces. But I do want to mention really quickly that our boards were comparable through our first test to MDF and particle board. But because MDF and particle board use formaldehyde and the process is not wet form, it is a different type of composition completely. We don't add any formaldehyde because we do wet forming, and we found that with the right variables that there was enough bonding strength in there. So you would normally see particle board and MDF within furniture, cabinetry, usually there's a laminate covering it. And what I've been trying to do, in addition to my own art and sculptural installations and work, is to make prototypes of functional forms or sculptural forms that show the properties, so sort of flexural properties that are inherent in this material as opposed to MDF and particle board. So this is a woven, non-functional table. These are hangers that I designed based off different trusses. This is at a residency and did a workshop residence in San Francisco. And these iPad cases, inserted in them are some of the composite material covers, so substituting it, right, instead of using the other types of boards. And I still do work with remnants. I mean, the denim jacket on the right is actually remnants from a denim sewing factory. And just kind of really trying to explore, what the possibilities are of this material. So these are all composite material. And some of the classes I teach, the students were using the material to design, never having worked with it before, but spending time over the semester. And as you can see, it's a surfboard, actually. And then this is the last image. So this is still ongoing, and I try to combine in my practice moments where I actually can explore just art and sculptural pieces, but also focus on design as well too.